everyone. Good morning. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today for this webinar. We're going to, I'll contextualize what our topic is today in the webinar. Greg will present his findings from his research, and then I'll talk about how we can use this information to, in each aspect of our fundraising process, and how we can strategize at each step for greater success based on the findings that Greg is sharing with us. So why go to the trouble of looking at what foundations and understanding them better? First off, the foundation grants do present an opportunity for not-for-profit organizations. Over $50 billion last year in the U.S., over $3.5 billion in Canada in grants. And so in terms of diversifying your contributed income, foundations can be an important component to that and give you the kind of bedrock that allows you to be more expansive in other areas. Foundations traditionally give to the same people. Once you have them as a partner, they will give over a number of years if the relationship is sustained. They understand that projects, that issues take time for solutions to work, and so they're often very willing to stay through that whole process and support the organization, truly making an investment in you. So as a aspect of your contributed income, they're very, very important. There are challenges to actually getting foundation partners, and just to touch on a couple of fairly important ones that you need to take into account as you're doing your fundraising. One is that foundations are absolutely overwhelmed with the number of applications that they are receiving from not-for-profits. For example, they are 1.5 million not-for-profits in the U.S., and there are just over 110,000 foundations. The foundations are growing at about 10% per year, and the not-for-profits are growing at about 30%. So it's wonderful that there are so many people wanting to do so many good things in the world, but the pie, if you will, of the foundation funds is limited. And so one needs to stand out from that crowd, and one needs to address the foundations with the awareness of what it is, the realities of their situation as well. From the not-for-profit perspective, foundation fundraising is a fairly labor-intensive process. Writing grants, putting together the outcome measurements, all of that involves the whole organization from the program side, the fundraisers, and so forth. And so it's very important that we be very focused and very strategic in how we go about doing foundation fundraising because of the amount of time that a grant application can take. Foundation fundraising is also a bit of a strange beast in that it's the only kind of fundraising we do where we don't understand who you're asking money from, and the people that are being asked for the money don't know the people who are asking them. So it's a very unusual situation. Normally in fundraising, you're going to those who are involved in your organization, you're going to those who are who understand your organization or know of your organization, and that's who you're asking money from. You have a relationship with them already. Foundation fundraising, you don't have that. So this type of information that you're receiving today is going to mitigate that factor. It's going to reduce the level of that particular challenge because it's helping you get to know the foundation fundraising environment overall. And this is a preliminary, really, to any kind of fundraising strategy that you may be undertaking, getting to know the environment. What are the trends in the application process? What is it that foundations are looking for? Where are their interests? What kinds of processes are they utilizing? What are their challenges? What's the reality from their point of view of the not-for-profit sector? It's very important to understand this before you even begin any kind of fundraising and before you begin any kind of moves, as you would when you're actually working directly with foundations and prospective foundations, of identifying, qualifying, cultivating, asking, and stewarding your gifts. It also, this kind of information fits in at the cultivation stage, where you're trying to get to know individual foundations as well. You've got a starting place in understanding them to begin that increasing closeness in relationship. This information will also up-level all of the industry applications, and it's one of the major reasons why Hope Consulting moved forward with this project, was the idea of making the whole system more efficient. Higher quality applications is good for everybody. It's good for the not-for-profits. It's good for the foundations. It mitigates some of their challenges and up-levels the whole industry for everyone. So bottom line on what it is that foundations are looking for. Foundations are looking for high-performing organizations that impact a given issue or serve a population in a significant way. If you think about it from this perspective, each foundation has an interest in a particular area, in a particular issue or population, and they want to make a difference. And they're entrusting the not-for-profit organization with doing that for them. They will give you the investment, and they are giving, they invest in you, and they're asking you as an organization to make the difference in the world that they want to make. So it's very important to understand what their criteria is and demonstrate that you meet it, that you are able to fulfill the mission that they want to see occur in the world, and that that your ability to do that is in alignment with what their interests are, and also with what their criteria are in terms of your performance. So today, our goal is to provide you with the information on what the foundations are looking for, and then secondarily to help you improve your fundraising and your operations. So I'm going to ask Greg to step in at this point and share his findings to give us a starting point. Greg?
Thank you very much for that great introduction, Shadi. Again, my name is Greg Orch. I'm a consultant with Hope Consulting. And what I am is focused on creating a more effective philanthropic market. And as part of that, we do quite a bit of research in the space. And before I get into my findings, I wanted to just give you a quick overview of some of the work we've done so you understand where some of the information I'm about to present comes from. We started off with research called Money for Good, and that was back in 2010. We looked at the landscape and felt that there was not very good information on why people are giving to charity, what their behaviors are when they do so, and what their interest is in directing any of their dollars to the causes or the organizations that could have the most impact possible. So we did a study of 4,000 Americans in the top 30% of the income brackets to really create that baseline of their giving behaviors and preferences. When we finished that, we felt it was very interesting and sort of very new and important information for the space, but where we weren't able to get to in that original set of research was, what are people looking for going forward, and what could change their giving behaviors? So that's why we came up with Money for Good 2, which we did in conjunction with GuideStar, and it was supported by the Gates Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, and LiquidNet. And it's really the Money for Good 2 findings that are going to be the subject of most of my remarks here today and most of the information I provide here today. What we did in Money for Good 2 was, one, look at what people are looking for going forward in the future and what could change their behaviors. How can we get people to look for more information, to be more active and more engaged when they give to organizations? And importantly, for this conversation, instead of just looking at individual donors, we expanded it to foundation program officers and other grant makers at foundations. So what we really looked at was we studied over 725 foundation grant makers, people responsible for doling out the money at foundations, to understand, how do you make your decisions today? Where do you get your information? What information are you looking for? What are you happy and not happy about when it comes to the grants that come across your desk? And what can nonprofits do to better position themselves? So it's that information, on the information, how they want that information to come to them, the source of that information that I want to talk about in in the rest of my remarks here today. So starting off, I want to talk about sort of the motivations and mindset for foundations. And Shadi referenced this in one of her slides earlier. But when you look at it, foundations are looking to give to the highest performing organizations that align in their cause areas of interest. So we studied across these 700 plus foundations and asked them what was most important to them. And there are really two things that rise to the top. The first is, the proposal or the grantee needs to be directly aligned with the cause area that they're trying to address. And furthermore, sort of aligned with how they're trying to make progress within that cause area. And I bring that up because it's amazing when Shadi referenced the first, the identification and qualification steps of getting foundation grants. A lot of nonprofits put out sort of a blanket approach, approaching many foundations to try to get money, and find that a lot of them are rejected immediately because they're really not aligned with what the foundation is trying to do in that cause area, where they might not really be aligned in the cause area. And that's sort of the gating step for the foundation is alignment there. And the second thing that they care about is that your organization is going to, or this grantee will be the one that will be most effective, have the most impact possible with these grant dollars. They're approaching this almost like someone trying to maximize returns in a mutual fund and trying to find the best funds for their particular case and needs. And they really do a lot of due diligence around this. And while that may not seem surprising that they care about the cause area and the impact, it's interesting when you look, when you compare it to other groups. So if we had the same chart up here for individuals, it looks very different. Of course, the cause area matters, but then individuals are really just looking to give to organizations that won't waste their money and will do a good job with it, be useful stewards, but they're not looking to maximize the impact of their dollars per se. It's really something that's very particular to foundations and very fundamental to how foundations think about their decisions and go about the process. So with that as context, let's think a little bit about their research behaviors and what we know about that. And we find that foundations take their research very seriously. So on the left-hand side, we see that foundations research 9 out of 10 grants that they give. Again, as comparison, individual donors research less than a third of their grants, or right about a third of their grants. So we really see foundations spending, looking at everything that comes across their desk, even most of the legacy grants that they're renewing, and looking at them carefully and doing research on them. And they spend on average about 4 hours, with a large number of them, close to 40% spending more than a day actually looking at each particular grant that they make. And when they research, what we find that's also unique is they're researching to find the best organization. So at the bottom here, we find a full 42% are doing research to choose between different organizations and find the best one. Again, these are very different behaviors than what we see with individuals, where we see, as opposed to 90% research, it's 33%. As opposed to 4 hours researching with foundations, it's under half an hour for individuals. And while almost 50% research to find the best organization with individuals, it's a very small minority. One of the questions we get is about small foundations, and I wanted to address that specifically because of the tens of thousands of foundations in the U.S., the vast majority of them, 80% or so, are very small foundations, and people feel they act more like individual donors than they do like larger foundations. And I want to look at that real quickly with regards to 3 categories. One, how often do grant makers at these organizations take any action before they donate, which for individual donors can be as simple as talking to a friend or family member quickly that might be involved in the organization to see what they have to say about it. Secondly, how many of them actually self-describe themselves as doing research, like actually proactively taking some steps to find out more about the organization? And how often, when they research, do they research to compare to find the best organization? When we look at individual donors, we find that a lot of them take some action, but only a third research, and only about 1 out of 20 are researching to find the best organization. It's a small minority. Whereas if you look at foundations, you find that 89%, or 9 out of 10, do some research, and just about 40% research to compare to find the best grantee for their dollars. the question is, where do small foundations, which I'm defining right now as those with less than $1 million in assets, fit in? And it turns out that they're much more like foundations than they are like individual donors. They research 80% of the time, and they often do it to compare to find the best organization. So while people feel that small foundations act like individual donors, our research shows that they're actually spending a lot of time and taking a lot of care with the money they're doling out. They have a mindset and a behavior set that's much more similar to foundations than they are to individual donors. So now I want to talk quickly about what information they're looking for. And we can look at that in two dimensions. One, how much information they're looking for, and secondly, what type of information they're looking for. And we look first at how much information, and this is just sort of a proxy for this. We tested a bunch of different types of data across these three user groups, individuals, advisors to individuals, and foundation grant makers, to see what information was most important and how much information they were looking for. And we found that while individuals are only looking for about 8 pieces of information to make a decision, foundations have more appetite for more than double that, almost 20 pieces of information. And the numbers 8 versus 19 aren't as important as the point that foundations are much more hungry. They're looking for a lot more information than our individual donors. They're looking deeper into information, whereas individuals might be comfortable with simply an overhead ratio. Foundations want to see the income statement, the balance sheet, and they want to understand what's going into the costs and the revenues. They're just looking a lot more deeply than our individual donors at a lot more information. And when we look at what kind of information they're looking for, that's on the right-hand side, we find a couple things. First, I would make the point that foundations are looking for a full picture of an organization. They want to understand not just the financial picture or the basic information, but really they want to understand the whole picture. What's the legal status, information about the cause, information about the financials, information about the mission, the leadership, the board composition, and most importantly, and this is sort of my second point, they care about the impact and the performance in the past and the expected performance and impact in the future. That is really what foundations are looking for. So they want the full picture with a real high premium on impact and effectiveness information. That's what's really driving them. And so you can see here on the right-hand side that we sort of have meta categories for information: financials, impact, cause. What we also did with this information is break it down into its more detailed constituent pieces. And that's what's showed on this next page. And I included this because I know everybody's going to get the materials afterwards and can look at this at sort of your own leisure. Because of all the data here, I don't want to present it, but I just want to explain what's on this page, which is if we think about the big categories like financials, cause, impact, we can, within each of those, there are specific pieces of data or information that we tested. And what this page shows is what are the most important specific pieces of information. So let's, not just what's the impact, but what they really care about are the program objectives, the detailed program description, the anticipated program outcomes. That's what comes out to be most important. And you can sort of see an overall forced ranking on the sheet on the left. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the breakdowns for the specific pieces of information. If people have questions on it, because there's so much detail here, I'm more than happy to follow up in the Q&A, or more than happy to follow up afterwards with even more detail about the specific pieces of data foundations are looking for. One other lens I want to take about thinking about what information they want, though, before we move on, is not just around what information is important, which is this y-axis that we have here, and I'm trying to draw with this purple marker. Hopefully that shows up on your screen. I'm sorry for my crude attempts. But not just how important it is, but also if it meets the nonprofit needs, which is along the x-axis. It's easy to think about things that are important but are ultimately table stakes. And this is a framework we use in a lot of scenarios. So one example is looking at the drivers of behavior for physicians prescribing drugs. If you ask them if drug efficacy is important, they say, oh, that's the most important thing possible. But it turns out that really doesn't drive a lot of their decision-making because it's a table stake. They know the drugs that come to them, that they have, that they might recommend, all work, or they feel that they'll all work, and really it's side effects, which they might say is a middle of importance need, but actually is the real unmet need because they don't really understand how the side effects work, or the side effects really vary for the patient, and that's what's determining how they're going to make their decisions. So thinking about that same sort of framework for the information on nonprofits, we can look at how this information stacks up, not only about importance, but also about if it's meeting the needs of foundation program officers and grant makers today. We find that some information, like endorsements and information on the other funders for the program, is not that important to them today. Other information, specifically information on the cause, the financial picture, legal status and legitimacy, and the basic information on the organization, like the mission, the board profile, the leadership, etc., are all very important to foundation program officers, but by and large, the information they receive today, they find acceptable. So they're happy with what you're providing. This doesn't mean you shouldn't provide this information or you should sort of take your foot off the gas pedal for these. This is still important information, but what's being provided is by and large meeting the needs of foundation program officers and grant makers on these dimensions, especially around basic information legitimacy. What they're really struggling with, though, is this impact and effectiveness information. This is the most important information, and it's also the information that they feel does not meet their needs. So this is how nonprofits can differentiate themselves, by giving better information insight about their expected impact and approach, by providing information on your past performance, how you've done in the past and what you achieved. This is what foundations are looking for and what they're not getting today. So this is where there really needs to be a premium on providing this information in easy to digest formats for the foundations to differentiate yourselves from the pack. So before I go into some specific tips, the one other thing that I think is important to talk about is where foundations are getting their information. And today they get their information largely from the nonprofit itself. They get it from grant proposals. They get it from talking with the organization's leadership. They might do a site visit. But basically, they're asking nonprofits for information. They're getting it from them, and they follow up multiple times to get more and more information. But we asked, in a slightly different format, where they want to go for information tomorrow. And the one thing that popped up here that was a trend that we saw is they're interested in using third-party sites that provide research, information, or evaluation on nonprofits. And there's growing interest in these, growing awareness of these. And in particular, we found that GuideStar, who also was part of this research, but we tested their platform as well as some others specifically, is being used more and more by foundations to initially vet organizations to find potential grantees in their area of interest. And we feel foundations are moving more and more to trying to use these third-party sites. They feel that there's benefit for the grantees because they can provide their information in one spot instead of to a plethora of different foundations, all of whom have different specific needs and formats. And the foundations like the ability to look across a landscape and compare organizations to one another and do some simple vetting of the organizations they're interested in. So today, they get the information primarily from the nonprofit, but in the future, we're seeing a bit more of a trend toward these third-party sites. So what can nonprofits do based on all that information if you're trying to get money from foundations? I'm going to provide 6 thoughts here, and then I'm going to pass it back to Shadi, who's going to talk about the process and the fundraising process a little bit more holistically, where a lot of these themes will show up in there as well. The first one is bark up the right tree. Again, the cause area and alignment with how a foundation is trying to make a change within that cause area is the gating step. It's a table stake, and it's a way that you can stop wasting time potentially appealing to organizations that aren't the right fit. The second is a focus on impact. Not only is past performance and expected outcomes from a current project or initiative the most important information for foundation program officers, it's what they're lacking, what they desire more of, and ways in which nonprofits can differentiate themselves by communicating this to them, by being more explicit about it in your letters of intent, in your actual applications, in your discussions and your conversations with program officers. highlighting what you plan to do, the impact you plan to have, and what you've done in the past that makes you confident that you'll achieve this is what people are really looking for. One sort of tool that you can use to collect this information is called charting impact. And it's an initiative that was started by GuideStar, the Better Business Bureau, Wise Giving Alliance, and Independent Sector. And really what it is a 5-question tool that nonprofits can answer. The information is posted on the Charting Impact site, and it's also put in a format that you can use with your donors, with foundations, and within your own organization. I really encourage you to go to chartingimpact.org to check it out. We have no ties or affiliation with them, so I'm unbiased in this, but we found that the questions that they ask, the format it's presented in, is something that is of interest to individual donors, of interest to foundation grant makers and program officers, and more importantly is really beneficial to nonprofits themselves. When we talk to the 200-plus nonprofits that have already filled out Charting Impact, they say the biggest impact for them is how it's helped get their board aligned, how it's helped get their executive leadership aligned about what they're doing, and most importantly, what they're not doing. So it's really proven to be a very important and impactful tool for nonprofits, and it's also aligned with what foundations are looking for. The 5 questions are very simple. What's your organization trying to accomplish? What are your strategies for making this happen? What are your capabilities for doing this? How do you know if you're making progress, or how will you know if you're making progress? And what have and haven't you accomplished so far? And that's really getting to the heart of some of the impact information and the qualitative impact information that these foundations are looking for. And we feel that filling this out, even if you don't use the exact format with the foundations, really prepares you well to have these important conversations with program officers, align your organization around the impact you're trying to have, and it'll ultimately create a better messaging platform for you. GreatNonprofits.org is another organization that and sort of tool that I wanted to throw up here. Great Nonprofits, if you're not familiar with it, is basically like Yelp for nonprofits, and they collect stakeholder and user reviews. We find that foundations are more and more interested in beneficiary feedback, and it's a nice way to show the impact you're having on the population you're trying to impact. And it's also very useful, again, for you as an organization as you're thinking about your own operations. It gives you a chance to get the voice of your quote-unquote customer and act upon that information so you can improve your operations and your interventions. So another tool that not only helps you collect impact information, but can be useful for your organization as well. 5th is show off. There are ways you can highlight your outcomes, and that can be from your own research, evidence from your own programs that have happened in the past and how you've evaluated them, or from third-party sites, be it Charity Navigator, Great Nonprofits, Philanthropedia, which has experts review nonprofits, GiveWell, which is another intermediary that rates organizations. There are these and more organizations that are trying to provide objective third-party views of nonprofit performance, and if you get good reviews from them or they're thinking about your organization favorably, it's worthwhile highlighting that. It's also worth highlighting your own, the impact of your own evaluation and monitoring. How many people you're affecting, what the impact is on that population. Again, this is the type of information foundations are looking for, and we find that a lot of nonprofits feel that there's sort of they don't want to get too data focused, so they hide a lot of this information. We actually think you should be a little bit more proactive and show it off a little bit more, because it's really the unmet need for these population groups. And finally, follow-up. Continue the conversation. Explain to the foundation what impact you're having if you do get a grant, you know, and show them the impact that their dollars are having, because a lot of foundations do make repeat grants to the same organization. When they find an organization that's having impact in their cause area, it's easier for them and oftentimes more effective for them to continue grants to that same organization to maximize the impact of their portfolio. And my final note is these tips are not really useful only for foundations, but also for individual donors as well. While I started off saying that individual donors have a much different perspective and motivation for giving to organizations. They're trying not to waste their money as opposed to maximizing the impact. At the end of the day, they still care about the cause area, and they're still interested in understanding the impact a nonprofit's having. While they might not be as data hungry, the same general story can have impact with individual donors as well. There's a lot more we are putting together on these tips and this information, and there's a guidebook that's going to be released on September 25th, so just around the corner, called More Money for More Good. It's authored by myself and Bob Ottenhoff, who's the outgoing CEO of GuideStar. And what it does is it takes all this information, the 10,000 plus surveys that we've conducted with individual donors and foundation program officers, puts it in more of a narrative form about what people are looking for and what their unmet needs are, provides examples and applications of other organizations that are doing this well and using it for effect, both for their organization and for fundraising, and then closes with 10 specific tips that nonprofits can do to get more money for more good. So if you're interested in this, it will be available at guidestar.org/moneyforgood. Again, it's being launched on September 25th. It's going to be available free of charge in electronic version and at cost for a printed version. And if you also want to get in touch for more about this or to make sure that you get a copy of this when it comes out, you can email me at greg@hopeconsulting.us. My email's there toward the top, and I'm more than happy to follow up and make sure you get a copy of this when it comes out. With that, that's sort of the completion of what I wanted to discuss about my remarks, about what foundations are looking for, what information they want, what they're getting and not getting today, where they want to get it, and what you can do to better attract foundation funds, as well as hopefully improve the impact and the effectiveness of your organization by doing some of these things. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Shadi to talk about the process that foundations go through when making decisions, putting some of this information in context, and talking a little bit more about things you should keep in mind when seeking funds from foundations. So back over to you, Shadi.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was so illuminating for all of us. Such great information. If we can use this information to actually, strategize going forward in the various aspects of our fundraising, I think it can really help us and help attract more funds. I think one of the most important things that Greg pointed out for us is that the foundations are hungry for more information. They want to have a full picture from not-for-profit organizations, and this is how you're going to distinguish your organization from others. This is how you're going to stand out from the crowd. So how we use this information to impact key elements of our fundraising process, such as how we build our case for support, the research and prospect management, and how we present our organization in our letters of inquiry, proposals, our website, and other materials, and how this helps us attract more funds to our organization. So let's tackle them one by one and see how this information integrates with this. So job number one is aligning with the foundation's giving interests, finding the foundations who are interested in making an impact in the area that you two are working in, and then showing them that you are in alignment with that. That, as Greg called it, barking up the right tree. Second main thing that you need to do in your communication with foundations is to demonstrate that your not-for-profit is a high-performing, high-impact organization that's having a very real effect on the issue of the population that the foundation is interested in working with in a very significant way. And so what do we mean by high-performing organization? I think from the findings Greg has just showed us that it's clear that capacity, your ability to fulfill your mission based on a proven track record, based on a favorable comparison to other organizations, is very much how you demonstrate that you are a high-performing organization. Foundations also want to see that you are efficient, and that you have an effective approach that really has the ability to leverage the dollars that they are giving you into real change in the community or for a particular population. And then how about high impact? I think here it's proving that there's a compelling need within the community for your organization, that its programs, that you are clear on the benefits generated by your organization and its programs. Perhaps you have a fresh approach to some of these age-old problems in our communities and our society, and that your programs are scalable. They give the foundation a doorway into greater impact within a community because you can act as a model, or because you can increase the number of people that are impacted by your programs at an incremental cost increase, or that you're able to take they're able to take your approach and utilize it for other organizations or in other regions. And so high impact, high performance, everything that you say and do about your organization, you want to be able to articulate this. And before you can really come to that place of being able to present this clearly and powerfully, you really need to undertake a case for support process. And that allows you a chance to articulate who you are helping, why you're trying to help them, and what you're doing. And a case for support process is you're creating an internal document that brings together all the core information about your organization that you're going to need for grant writing, for all of your fundraising, and in fact reduces the work required to later tailor your materials for each individual fundraising foundation that you're applying to, and also make sure that you're meeting the criteria and aligning with the interests of the foundations. In creating your materials, it's really, really important that you take whatever you do in your case for support and make sure it's reflected in all of your materials. There's two things that Greg mentioned that I think that speak to this point. One is remembering the large appetite that foundations have for information, the full picture they want to have of your organization. So taking yourself through a case for support process allows you to actually gather it and have it all in one place and be able to utilize it. Secondly, you want to make sure that all of your materials, your website, your materials that might be about marketing programs as opposed to about actually fundraising, every single thing that you talk about your organization, every single place that you put your organization out for public viewing, you want to make sure your case for support in terms of fundraising is there. It's almost like a branding process that you would go through on the marketing side. You want to do it on the fundraising side, and then, as I say, make sure that it is across the board, particularly in terms of uploading your information to third-party organization sites, as Greg mentioned. Secondly, your very own website needs to absolutely be a fundraising tool, not just the archive and marketing tool that we all tend to use them as. And third, you need to make sure that your board of director and your other important stakeholders and leadership understand, are well educated and on side with your case, and the case for support process gives you an opportunity to bring everybody together and make sure they're clear and understanding what it is that your organization is about. So the case for support really is the must-do step. I know it's a lot of work, and many not-for-profit organizations shy away from the labor intensity of putting one together, but it really is the sine qua non of fundraising. You must do this step before you can really move on to the other steps that are necessary in terms of putting together your case, presenting your organization for fundraising. So this is a clear articulation of your organization's purpose, its strategies, and its goals. All of this rests on a number of different areas. Most important to it is the assessment of need. Everything that you do, everything that you are, rests on on the need that you perceive in the community, and this need needs to be compelling. There's a problem in our community. There's a problem that a particular population is experiencing, or a gap in service. You're using data to support the scope and the depth of the problem. And then looking at, well, what is it your organization, how is it intervening in this problem? This is really what your programs are, how their intervention in a problem or the filling of a particular gap. And then you're going to report what the outcomes, how effective were you? What kind of impact did you have on this issue with this population really becomes your outcomes. And foundations are looking for this not to be a sort of an extra that you do after you've done your program, you report on the results. They want to see it being actually integral to your programming itself, so that you're using the outcomes to develop programs, you're using the outcomes to actually drive the organization in terms of the programs, in terms of where you're going with work with the population that you're working with. And then whatever results you're experiencing, you're refining your programs better over time in order to better meet the needs of the community that you are serving. Also, a very important aspect of this is the capacity. Does your organization have the ability, and how do you prove it has the ability to actually fulfill the mission that it has stated? Are the programs that you're asking for funds, how do they relate back to this mission of your organization? Is it based on your expertise, the expertise of your staff, or your past successes? Is it your methodology? Is it the people on your board? Is it the technology they're using? How is your organization uniquely qualified to carry out this program? Greg mentioned the kind of comparison that foundations are doing, because they're not just looking, so it's not just important to meet the foundation in terms of giving interest. You have to show that you're the best place, you're the best people in your community to actually make a difference in this particular area. So you'll answer that question directly within your proposals, within your letters of inquiry, but I also want to really emphasize that it's important that you come from this perspective. You come from the perspective of being a high capacity, high impact organization, and that you're also always speaking with that voice as you present information about your organization. I think the rest of these sections that you can use in your case for support as you develop it are fairly understandable, fairly self-explanatory, but I'm happy to take questions on them during the Q&A period. One other thing to point out is innovation. I've already talked a little bit about scalability, but if you have any kind of fresh approach to these problems, it's something that you really want to make front and center. Is it the uniqueness of your program, the method of delivery, the unique outcomes or measurement tools that you're using? Indicate how your organization is structured for change, and how you can serve as a model. Make these aspects of what it is that you're doing, highlight it, because it's something that foundations are very much interested in at this time. And again, once you've completed the case for support, which is an internal document, you are then going to make sure it's reflected in all of your materials. So after you've gone through the case for support process, your next step is to identify the prospects that you will be, the prospective foundations that you will be going to ask for funds. I think from the information that Greg and the insights that Greg shared with us, I think we really need to see that research needs to be two-directional. You need to be researching the foundations from a prospect of understanding the foundation environment, as well as researching it from the point of view of you as an organization actually seeking grants. So a couple of tips here on how to focus your research on the foundation environment. One is to do an analysis of the trends in foundation giving in your particular sector. So you want to look at what is it that foundations are giving to, what kinds of gifts, what amounts they're giving, and what kinds of organizations, and what activities are they giving to in your particular sector. For example, if you were a youth development organization, and you might look at foundations and say, well, what are foundations interested in right now? Are they interested in giving to programs that work with at-risk children? Maybe they're interested in more in the upper ages of youth. They're interested in teenagers rather than young children. Maybe there's a trend towards giving towards excellence in terms of scholarships and things like that. Perhaps they're interested more in programs around prevention, such as preventing addiction or early youth pregnancies or so forth. So you really want to look at the environment of foundations for your particular sector and have an understanding of the trends there. Second form of analysis that you want to do is a competitive analysis. So here you're looking at similar organizations to your own, whether they be in your community, in your region, your state or province, or national organizations. And you want to look here and see again what kinds of gifts, what amounts, and so on that foundations are giving to similar organizations. Where you share foundation partners, check to see, benchmark, see if you're leaving any money on the table. Are the grants that you're receiving at a similar level? Are they for different kinds of projects, or are they similar? And also, this is the beginnings of a prospect list for you in terms of looking at similar organizations and the foundations who are giving to them. You're then going to use these pieces of information to prioritize the programs within your organization that you're actually going to do foundation fundraising for. Not every project is appropriate for a foundation. Some projects you may be much better off fundraising from other sources, such as individuals or government or corporate, what have you. So you want to take your list of programs, take your needs as far as contributed income goes, and see which, based on your analysis of the foundation environment, which ones are the best to go to. As a friend of mine used to say, a mentor of mine used to say, put your spoon where the soup is, in terms of making sure that you're going to foundations for the most foundation fundable programs that you have in your organization. And I would recommend 1 to maximum 3 programs that you're applying for foundations to at a time, in a chunk of a 2 or 3 month period, because of the labor intensity of the foundation fundraising process. And you want to make sure that you're really focused and really clear and really powerful in terms of your presentation and your whole process. So then the internal kind of focus that you're going to take, once you know the programs you're going to focus on for your foundation fundraising, you're going to speak to various stakeholders within your organization, board members, current donors, staff, even recipients of your programs, and see if there's any relationships there that you can leverage into opening a door for you at a foundation. And then use the 4-point assessment. This is something that we've developed here at Foundation Search to help organizations very quickly assess whether a foundation is, in fact, a good match for them in terms of asking for a grant. Do they actually give in your community, in your state or province, in your town? And to make sure, this is the #1 reason foundations turn down not-for-profit organizations, so make sure that you are meeting them at this place at the very least. Do they give to new recipients? Looking at the data, again, in foundation searches, about 20% in terms of new to previous recipients. So if a foundation gives at less than 20% to new recipients, or the amount of money that they give to new recipients is less than 20%, you may still go to them, but they might be a lower priority. If they, of course, are giving more than 20%, they would be higher in your priority list of prospective foundations. And then utilize the information that you learn about each individual foundation to peg your request as far as the dollars that you are asking for. You're obviously not going to go to just one foundation. Most foundations are going to say no. If you had a 20% response rate from foundations, that would be very good. So use your past experience, use your past rate of success to determine how much money do you need to have, how many asks do you need to have, how much money do you need to have out there. An example that I suggest to organizations if they've never done that before in terms of their solicitation plan, I suggest start at 20 to 1. So for every dollar you need to raise, have $20 of ask out there. So if you needed to raise $50,000, you would have $1 million in ask out there, knowing that most people are going to say no, and that if you had a 20% response rate, you would actually raise the $50,000 that you need. And then most importantly, aligning with the foundation's giving interests. And I think on two levels here, in terms of what Greg was telling us, not only do they want to make sure that you are actually asking the foundation who's interested in the area or the population that you're working with, but also that you are in alignment with them in terms of how they feel the solution, what the solution is for this issue. Find out within the cultivation process of foundations what they believe and try and align on that level as well. So your moves through the foundation fundraising process, identification and qualification are your research steps. Cultivation is still an important piece of what you're doing here. This information that we've shared with you today obviously is very important, but it does not allow you to skip over the step of cultivating very specifically each foundation that you're going to. Knowing about foundations in general doesn't necessarily tell you about the individual foundation, and so you must take the time to get to know them, to find out more about them, utilizing your stakeholders, and so on, involving them, engaging them in your organization in any way that you can. Of course, foundation fundraising is more than just getting the gift. It's also building long-term relationships as well. So the whole system is continuously moving through the process, and at any time, foundations simply find, your relationship with a foundation is always somewhere within this quite a closed and ongoing system of moves that you are going through. So what are our writing objectives? I think, again, not to get too repetitive, and because we're coming up to the hour, and I want to make sure that we jump into our Q&A period in a good time. The writing objectives are pretty clear from the findings. Always be communicating, know who you're communicating with, always, through that cultivation, through that understanding of the foundation environment, and then always be communicating your capacity as an organization, the fact that you're high-performing, and the impact that you will be making in the community. And I think the information was very clearly stated that they want a lot of information from the organization. And so I just put together a really quick list of what it is that you may want to include in that helps the foundation make a decision about the awarding you a grant. One of the things I really want to highlight again here is how is your organization uniquely qualified to carry out this mission. writing objectives from the point of view of presentation. Even though the foundation has said that this is their area of interest, don't expect them to understand the jargon of your sector. Make sure that your applications are jargon-free. Make sure your presentations are good-looking, easy to read. Nothing smaller than 12-point font. I often see people trying to jam in information by making their font smaller, and all it does is make their application really unreadable. And if you can imagine what it's like from the foundation's perspective, reading hundreds, thousands of grants. I've been on a jury. It's pages and pages, boxes of reading for every grant that you are going to award. So make the presentation attractive and make it readable and appropriate for the foundation. Customize tailor every application specifically for that foundation, making sure that you are fulfilling their guidelines exactly and that you are demonstrating your relevance to their giving interests at each time. So we've taken these ideas and translated them into a format for a letter of inquiry. You're going to distill this down to its most essential elements, taking your proposal down to 2 pages, but including within that all of the information that the foundations are looking for that Greg shared with us in terms of insights. And one of the things that we suggest is that, of course, that it's tailored to each one. Secondly, that right at the top of your letter, you show your alignment. So in this example here, and my suggestion is that you do try to align with the foundation on 2 or 3 levels. Here's an example. The organization is a community center looking for a capital gift. They're going to align with the organization and state that alignment right up front, below or above the salutation. And so, we understand that you have a history of building projects. We understand that you're interested in benefiting children and in education. So here's 3 alignments, and we are a match to you in these 3 ways, and we're asking for such and such an amount of money. This immediately sparks the foundation's interest because they know you've done your due diligence about them, that you understand who they are, and that you are about to present them with something that actually is in alignment with how they want to make a change in the community. You're going to include your mission and your organization, the program information, the details on the program, including the budget, your capacities in an organization to actually implement this program and why you're the best people to do so, including your past performance, the outcomes that you expect. Is there any innovations or is there a possibility for scaling in terms of your project? How will the foundation's grants actually help you fulfill your mission? How will them investing in you actually help this population? You want to be clear and present that in a powerful way. What's the timing of the program, the timing in terms of the need of the money, and a very clear request to be invited to submit a full proposal and contact information. So that's my, my suggestions coming out of the findings that Greg shared with us. Greg, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, that's terrific, and I think it shows how some great thoughts about how nonprofits can be most effective in soliciting grants from foundations. The 3 things I would echo is I think you'll hear both our research and Shadi's perspective very much in sync around the need for alignment when you're at the early stages identifying and qualifying organizations. We really need the alignments. And when cultivating an ask, there's a lot of overlap between what we're saying about building the case for support that focuses on your expected impact and how you think you're going to make a change, and how that really needs to be front and center in the case for support. And then I have a few other points, but I've also seen a lot of the questions come in, and I think I can tie in the rest of my quote-unquote concluding remarks maybe as response to some of the great questions that have come across already.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Greg. So we're going to move into our question and answer period. I just wanted to mention that this is the first in a series of webinars that you can attend individually or purchase it as a series. If you've attended today, you will get a discount and refund on this amount or put it towards the series itself. And there's some great webinars coming up. Our next one, which is just 2 weeks from today, is about how to engage your board in the fundraising. As we saw in one of the slides that Greg presented, one of the major places that foundations are going to for information about the organization is to the leadership of the organization. So I mentioned when you're developing your case for support that you really want to engage your board and your major stakeholders in that process, and we're going to take a whole webinar to go through how you do that, how to script it for them, how to give them all the tools they need and the confidence they need to be advocates for you within the community and to foundations themselves. And then we'll also talk about developing your cultivation steps in developing your relationships with funders so that you have long-term relationships. And then in terms of how do we give foundations what they need through the stewardship process. Our guest teacher in those next 3 webinars will be Melissa Brown, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania in the MBA for not-for-profit. So let's open up the question and answer period at this time. I'm going to read the questions, and then Greg and I will determine from that who will answer. We might both answer. So first question is, what if your charity is brand new and you do not have all the information to present to the foundation? Greg? Yeah,
that's a great question. There's another question that comes later on about if you don't have a track record, kind of the same theme. So I don't think there's a real reason to be concerned if you're small, new, don't have a track record. The reality is a lot of organizations that have been around haven't been measuring their outcomes, haven't been evaluating their programs, and don't have a great track record that they can show off all the time. So the fact that you're new, in one case you're not expected or anticipated to have that, and that's kind of recognized, so I think that's okay. Also recognize that what's more important than past performance and track record is your expected impact and what you expect your outcomes to be in the future. And that's really what I think is the key if you're brand new or small to focus on. What foundations are looking for is, what's your logic model? What's your theory of change? Why do you think this program or your strategy is going to be effective? And to do that, I think you need to show that you understand the issue and what's driving that issue and what's causing the problems that you're trying to address. While you might not have a track record, you can certainly discuss what other programs have worked and haven't worked and how you're going to learn from those or how you're going to do things differently based on what you've learned from potential failures in the sector in the past. And talking about that is really going to strengthen your case for support. And then, explaining how your strategy is going to map to the needs you see, the gaps you've seen with solutions that have happened today, and how you're going to be distinctive, and how what you're going about is going to really affect change in ways that hasn't happened before. And then finally, some of your capabilities. So who are you? What's the organization? Why should they trust you as individuals in an organization rather than others? What makes you, quote unquote, special? And again, and this was sort of the third final remark I had, I do think that the best tool I've seen out there to help you do this in an easy way is chartingimpact.org. I mean, it's literally just 5 questions. It seems very simple, but when you talk to people that have gone through it and done it, and you talk to organizations that have had everybody, sort of every executive or leader of the organization or every board member fill it out, and talk about, okay, where are the differences and the overlaps about what we see as the strategy we have, why we think we're uniquely positioned, really helps people hone in on their story about why they think they're going to have an impact, what makes them different, why an organization or foundation should trust them to help solve this problem. So I think focusing on your theory of change, your expected impact, is the right way to go if you don't have a track record or you're new. And the best tool I've seen to sort of just give you the questions and help you organize your thoughts and provide examples of how others have thought through this is Charted Impact.
Great. Thanks, Greg. I just want to add to that. I completely agree, and add to that go and research other people who are utilizing a similar approach to yours. If your approach is unique, obviously it's been developed based on some theory of its effectiveness, as Greg talked about, and you want to present what that theory is and the supports to it, how it was developed, and so forth. It's, I think, also an opportunity to work with perhaps an academic, go to a institution of higher learning in your community, and go to the social science department, go to the department that matches well with the kinds of programs you do, and see if anybody else, do the research, see if anybody else has, in fact, done a program similar to yours or what's happening in your own sector, maybe even partner with an academic and utilize your organization as a research project for that academic to study actually the kinds of impacts, the interventions that you are proposing to have with that community. And so then it actually expands the possibilities, and you can show your program to be being implemented and developed in a way that it can actually act as a model, which becomes very interesting to foundations, and you can actually use that as another key benefit of the program that you're implementing. Next question, do you have tips for making your website an effective fundraising tool? Greg?
Yeah. So 3 thoughts here. The first, the website should be simple and clear is sort of rule number 1. And the things that I think need to be emphasized, and what's tricky here is you're ultimately with a website likely appealing to a variety of different audiences. You have foundations looking there, you have individual donors looking there, you might have other constituents that you're trying to reach looking there, and you're trying to meet the needs of a broad population in one place, which is difficult. But I think talking about the impact you're having on the population or the community you're trying to address in very simple terms is important, and giving the sense that you're being a good steward and you care about the money you receive, and you're being a good steward with that, so you're using the money properly is important. One of the things that we've seen to be very effective is people that, I made a point about quote-unquote showing off, including links to, be it a 4-star rating from Charity Navigator or the badge from Philanthropedia if the experts thought you were doing great, or a 4.5-star review from Great Nonprofits. If you have positive accolades from third parties, definitely recommend putting those up there, because even if the recognition of those third parties is low, it's giving a sense of confidence that other people have looked at your organization and think it's doing a great job, and that third-party vetting is important to a lot of people, and frankly there it's a little bit more important to individual donors than foundations, but that's the third thing I would recommend. In terms of other resources, the guidebook that we have coming out on September 25th talks about this a little bit more. And the person that I think that I look across in the nonprofit landscape that has a lot of really intelligent things to say on marketing and website design, her name is Katya Andresen, and she works at Network for Good. And she has a blog out, so if you Google Katya, K-A-T-Y-A, Andresen, like Anderson, but R-E instead of E-R, and Network for Good, you'll come across her blog, and she posts daily with some great tips and best practices on how to make your organization stand out from others. And she talks a lot about website design, and she's sort of the third-party resource I would point you to.
Great. Thank you, Greg. I would just add that after you've developed your case for support, I would suggest to you that you look at your website from that perspective. Greg mentioned that the website actually is speaking to a number of audience, and that is absolutely true. So how do you have a conversation with those different audiences all in the same place? And I think it's about highlighting, because every audience that you're speaking to is interested in how effective is what you're doing. Most people's websites just talk about what it is they're doing, and what I'm suggesting to you is that as you're discussing what you're doing, have it come from the point of view of, and this is how well it's working, to talk, yes, share other people who have accolades for you in terms of how they've found it, but also for you yourselves to actually discuss, integrate the outcomes into your conversation, into your communication about your organization and its impact. Secondly, to that is to have the testimonials, images, have your website be really rich with the kind of deeper level information that is of interest, and have it be in terms of images particularly, because images can tell a lot in a very quick way. So that would be my other recommendation for how do you build your website in a way that helps you fundraise. We will be doing a full webinar on websites as a fundraising tool, so keep your eye out for that. That's probably coming later this year or early next year at the latest. Yeah, let's move on. As somebody asked the question, are there books or resources that are effective in helping develop a case for support? Greg, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I certainly don't know that I have a full list, but two that come to mind. A gentleman, Joe Fleischman, wrote a book called The Foundation, which I think is a great insight into foundations in general. And I don't know if it talks specifically about the case for support because I haven't read it in quite some time, but it has a great understanding of the foundation universe overall and would be worth a skim. And the other one, Paul Brest, who's the head of the Hewitt Foundation, wrote a book called Money Well Spent, which talks a lot about the idea of strategic philanthropy, which is really well tied to the idea of creating a case for support that focuses on your expected impact. So that would be the other one I would plug, if you will.
Yeah. And just using the word plug myself, I know I seem like I'm always recommending, but we have spent a lot of time thinking about what not-for-profits need, so we've been working away at creating a whole plethora of webinars and education programs, and we have, again, a plan to do a full case for support. There's already an introduction to the case for support that you can look on our website and purchase the recording for that. But we actually have in the works a plan to have a 2-3 month program. We're just working out the details where we'll actually bring in different experts and work through your case with you, and you'll be able to, give information in. We'll give you feedback and so on. So again, keep your eye out for that coming up. Probably in the spring of next year. Next question, how does one cultivate a grant maker that either will not return phone calls or will not answer emails? Greg, do you have any suggestions about that?
I'm going to semi-punt and combine. The next question is examples of how you and organizations worked with or cultivated relationships with foundations. Might be most efficient to sort of address those together. So, and in so doing, I don't know if I have a lot of suggestions if someone's not returning your phone calls or answering emails. But in addressing both of these, one, I think in terms of cultivating relationships overall, it's the first step, and maybe this is why phone calls or emails aren't being returned, is really to go through and understand not just, okay, you guys are giving money in philanthropy, or you're giving money to climate change, but understand what their priorities are within that area. What are they really trying to address? All these areas are broader than any one foundation can hope to solve, and most of them have recognized that and have sort of taken subsets of them that they're really trying to address, or within that, they're really trying to address a particular issue. So, okay, we want to address healthcare in Africa, and we're focused on distribution systems because we found one of the big issues as being we can't get the drugs to the people that actually need them. It's not a price issue, it's a distribution issue, so that's our focus. And it's generally pretty easy through going through their website to understand what their plan and approach is and really understanding that. So that's the first thing I would say, consistent with what we've said overall, but If people aren't answering your calls or emails, make sure you really have good alignment with what they're looking for, is step one. And other ideas in terms of cultivating the relationship is foundation program officers, by and large, and I'm making a generalization, do this job because they're interested in the cause area and having a change in this cause area. One thing that we've done effectively is continue to help them learn as we come up with not just my own research, but I find interesting reports on the subject that happen to be circulated through the media. I make sure that I keep in touch with our program officers, send those along with a note about how I think this is relevant or not relevant for this work, and become a resource, not just to execute on the grant they've provided, but to help them become more effective in their jobs by giving them more information, helping them learn more, making sure they're aware of other things that are out there because they're very busy people. And then finally, following up on the impact that you're having. Telling them not just your successes but your failures, how things are going and how you're going to change based on what you've learned. We've gotten very good responses from our foundations that support us. And one thing that they're always particularly happy about is we've spent X% of the dollars. We find that this particular strategy isn't working the way we intended. Therefore, we're going to change approach. We're going to change our tack, and we're going to repurpose the dollars with your permission. And they recognize not everything works, and they're very open to hearing about things that have failed and could be done differently and be done better. So being transparent about that and clear about that is very helpful.
Great. Thanks so much, Greg. Some really great tips in there. I just wanted to add to that, sort of to redefine a little bit the word cultivation. We tend to think of it as only an interaction, and of course that's the most important aspect of it. But if you think about cultivation as an increasing of your knowledge about an organization, then you can see that there are a number of ways to go about this. Not only in terms of, actually speaking to somebody and having them answer your questions and so forth, attending a webinar like today, finding out by researching the foundation themselves, looking at their website, looking at who they give, talk to other people who have worked with the foundation. I personally find the not-for-profit sector that we tend to be very helpful and supportive of each other, and look at each other not as a hard competitors the way you maybe is in the for-profit sector. And you can, you can call another not-for-profit up and say, I've worked on a Kresge application in the past successfully, 2 Kresges actually, that have succeeded, and I garnered a lot of information by calling other not-for-profits who had received Kresge grants, and they were very open and helpful. So, think about cultivation as, getting to know that foundation more and doing all bringing to bear all your all strategies around research, as well as an actual discussion with them. Again, this is another place for your board, for your stakeholders to help you open doors at these foundations through relationships, probably no more than 2 degrees of separation. But you'll find it's a small world, the not-for-profit world, and the chances are that you find that you may have some connection. It may not be an obvious one. It may be through another donor that you can connect, or maybe one of your donors or one of your foundations, you have a board of director who sits on multiple foundation boards, and you can use that relationship to help open the door at another foundation. So that's the kind of just some tips for you in terms of cultivation. The next question that somebody asked, if you don't mind, Greg, I'm going to go ahead and answer this one, and then perhaps you can jump in if you have any further suggestions. And the question is, how do you find competitive analysis? How can you find out what a foundation is giving money for? And I know that this is listed for the U.S. foundations, but not Canadian. Any advice for Canadians? First of all, let me just say that it is listed for Canadians too. I'm actually talking from Canada. I'm in Vancouver. Metasoft is the company that developed a tool called Foundation Search, which is a database of all foundations in Canada, the U.S., Australia, and England. It has all the analytics in terms of being able to go in and actually look at a foundation overall for its, what it's given in the past. We are not the only ones that do this, of course, and I would suggest that you simply go on to Google and Google foundation lists or foundation research tools and words like that to find out who. We, of course, believe we are best of the breed, but there's definitely tools out there that you can utilize for finding out this kind of information. And frankly, it's only the analytic tools that allow you to do a competitive analysis in a fairly efficient way. Of course, you can do it organization to organization, just going on and looking at their lists, looking at what the grants are for and so on, and collecting the information, maybe using a spreadsheet to do a kind of an analysis. But you will find that these kinds of research tools, these kind of databases have all of that information built in. And so have a look at that. They're usually by subscription or by membership, and see which one would suit you best. And just on this question of Canadians, I know there's a number of Canadians on the line today, and I do want to say that though Greg's findings are based on the U.S. Foundations that they spoke to, that Canadian foundations act very, very similar. I've worked in both countries and continue to work in both countries and to work with not-for-profits in both countries. And the foundations very much, they're very similar, even though our laws differ around what they have to give and how they do it and all of that. Of course, there are some Canadian organizations on the line as well who are fundraising in Canada, so you can just go ahead and apply what we're saying quite directly. Next question, can you give a few examples of how you or an organization you've worked with cultivated a relationship with foundation? So I think we've pretty much answered that question, so we're going to move on to the next one. And the next question is, where is the best site to do research for foundation trends? Again, I'm sorry to read questions where I've already done the answer, but it's the only way I can get through a lot. And I do feel like I answered that question in terms of looking for these kind of relevant databases that you can subscribe to and get that kind of information. Is there a good example of a case for success we might be able to access? Here's an organization that I would recommend to you as somebody who's done the case, presented their case as an organization really, really well. And the company is charitywater.org. They've been phenomenal in terms of presenting outcomes, in terms of presenting their case, articulating it very, very clearly, building it into their website in a very powerful way. So I would say go to charitywater.org and have a look at what they're doing there. I think it'll give you a lot of good examples. Greg, do you have any other examples?
Yeah, and actually Charity Water is one of the examples that's featured in that guidebook we have coming out on September 25th, More Money for More Good. They were definitely, we did a evaluation of the space and felt that they were one of the best at doing some of these things, about talking about their impact effectively, making the case for donors and foundations, following up effectively, giving good information. So I think they're terrific. Another one that I would also look at is a nurse-family partnership. They do a great job of tying the real issue that they see in the landscape and how that affects the poor, affects young mothers, affects their children, and then talks about how their solution impacts them along the different stages of the life. And they do a really nice job of tying their strategy with the problem they see in society. So that's another example I would use or look at. And in terms of actually articulating your case for support, I do know that the Charity Impact website has a little over 200 examples of how other organizations have answered those questions about what are you trying to accomplish, what are your strategies for making it happen, what do you expect to achieve, what makes you feel you'll achieve this, what have you done in the past, et cetera. So you can see how others sort of answer that question in more narrative form. But in terms of organizations and websites, I think Charity Water and NFP or Nurse Family Partnership are the best.
Great. And I'll type up the URL. Greg, could you type the URL of the one that you're giving as an example too? And then just so that people can actually see it, because sometimes voice is hard to hear. Next question, if you find a foundation that doesn't specify preferred approach, do you recommend sending a letter of inquiry first or a full proposal? I recommend that you go through a cultivation process and see if you can find. Don't stop at the information that you find on the website. Do your best to find a way to open the door and have a conversation with them before you send them anything. Cultivation happens before solicitation. Go as far as you can with that. And then, yes, the first formal communication that you probably will want to have with a foundation, if they don't specify, is a letter of inquiry or a letter of intent. Greg, did you have anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. What can an organization do to secure a place on a grant maker's pre-selected list? Greg, did you have anything?
I don't know the answer to that. I've been looking at that, and that's something we always try to find out as well. The one thing I would say is what we found is that the universe is pretty small. So when you do form a relationship with a particular grant maker, it's pretty easy to expand your network within that field because, A, that grant maker might be able to introduce you to other foundations doing similar things. You might be able to get involved in projects that are funded by multiple partners, and therefore you can form relationships with others. And the more you start to build these relationships, the more top of mind you are, and the more you can go to them with ideas as opposed to just responding to RFPs and start getting on the pre-select list. But the way we've done it is try to do a real good job on a project that we get that has grant funding, use that to network within the space, find other grantors that are looking to support this. But in terms of an actual pre-select list or anything more specific, I don't have any answers to that.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Greg, completely. I mean, being on somebody's pre-select list is somewhat like winning the lottery. It's just do a really good job of presenting your organization in every opportunity that you can, and they will find you. Once you get known within your own sector for the excellence of your work, and you will come to their attention in that way too. And then it's really about like a whole process of foundation, application, where that becomes really part of their relationship with you. It's not something that you usually go in as a first-time recipient that you immediately go to their pre-select list. It's usually something that happens over time of a relationship with a foundation. We're just at the half hour in terms of our question period. We've got 7 more questions. Greg, do you want to stay on the line and answer them, or do you want to answer them in writing? What's your choice?
I'm fine with whatever you'd like for the benefit of the attendees. I'm flexible either way.
Yeah, so why don't we stay on the line and answer these questions. People, I know that some of you need to jump off. This is all the time that you've put aside for this webinar. But when you receive the recordings, you can just simply go to the Q&A section and then, fast forward to the end in order to get the answers to these last questions if you need to jump off. Please, if you are jumping off, remember to do the post-webinar survey. We really appreciate your feedback. I don't know if you've seen the survey we did send out about our webinars. Please also, if you can, answer that if you get a chance. And hopefully you will join us for a webinar again in the future. So those who need to go, we understand. And for those who are staying, let's answer these questions. So the next one, Greg, is for the city government seeking funding for community safety. We are looking for grants for technology to implement citywide camera system and automated license plate readers. What foundation should we look for this type of technology and safety funding? I'm going to just answer this question. We don't have a foundation list that we're looking at just off the top of our head to give this answer to you. I would suggest that you do the kind of analysis that I suggested earlier, which is look at other governments or other groups of people who have received that kind of funding in the past, and that'll give you a place to start terms of looking for foundations that might support your project. Did you have anything to add to that, Greg?
Yeah, no, I think that's similar to using the tools at Foundation Search and Metasoft to find that type of information.
Next question. Most foundations have moved to an online process for letters of inquiry and applications, which are very specific requirements and character response limitations. Do you have any suggestions for this type of limited application?
Yeah, I don't see that one up in front of me. So just to make sure I heard it properly, it's that many foundations have sort of specific web-based platforms that have character limitations.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about the question is really about, this increase in online application process,
yeah,
which is, really a reflection, as you and I both know, of the tsunami of applications that the foundations are trying to deal with. They're trying to make it fair by limiting, and asking very specific questions that help them compare and all that. This person is asking if you have any suggestions around that.
So one, I would expect more of it, not less. And, there are two reasons why you're seeing more and more of that. One is foundations are getting bombarded with requests, and this makes life easier on them. And frankly, they have some power, so they can do that. And secondly, a lot of them are looking to try to do this and do it in a consistent way with other organizations to hopefully make life easier on the grantees themselves, because they realize that you're needing to solicit more and more foundations, and to the extent that they can have consistent questions across them, it's the common grant application, which still really hasn't happened to the extent that it's happened, say, for the common application for colleges, but there's more and more progress and more talk in that direction. I think there'll be more progress that way. So I think this is a trend that will be here to stay. I think it makes sense to address those questions using the constraints that are provided, and once you get through that initial process, using the follow-up time to elaborate on points that you feel you were not able to articulate in the LOI. But in the limited character spaces that you have, trying to differentiate yourselves because you have a clearly thought out theory of change, a clearly thought out logic model, that you have a great past performance, or that you have confidence about the outcomes you expect to get from this, as opposed to just narrative and niceties, is the way to focus your limited space.
Great. I think just to add a little bit to that is that this does not preclude you still trying to leverage relationships into opening doors at foundations. Foundations still want you to apply in a formal process that makes it fair for everybody, and that you must go through their process correctly, and that you shouldn't circumvent the officers, even though you may have a connection to, let's say, a director or somebody like that. So I just wanted to mention that don't think that this process precludes continuing to try to leverage relationships. And then the second thing is that these questions, the kind of questions they're asking, they're becoming very common from foundation to foundation. So, one of them can really help you take it and use it as a template for developing a letter of inquiry. Use it as a template for developing use it in your, for things you're going to find out and examine and articulate while you're developing your internal document called the Case for Support. So, if we can reframe this as something that's really helpful, both to us as individual not-for-profit organizations and to the industry as a whole, I think over time it actually will become, and you can make it advantageous to you rather than see it as a disadvantage. Next question. We're in the process of society rebranding. Do we hold off until we present consistent branding, or is the branding in the application the works we carry out? Currently, we are strategizing for a capital campaign. Do you have any suggestions there, Greg?
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I really understand the question about society rebranding.
Okay, so they're a society, and they're going through a rebranding process, and I think what she's asking is, do we hold off on doing our case for support until the branding is, or do we hold off on our application until the branding is complete? And that, one of the specific areas that they're looking at right now is their capital campaign. So, do you want me to jump in and answer to start off, and then, or you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think my perspective, and this is based on my personal experiences, you really need to have your ducks in a row internally before you can go externally. And we've always found that it's been much more effective to have a consistent, clear story that we're all on the same page about, if that's branding or if that's strategy or if that's our theory of change. We found we've had much more engaging discussions with foundations when we really have that well thought out and mapped out. And that's consistent with the data in the research about what they're really looking for. So, it really depends on how broad the scope of branding is, and if you know exactly what you're doing and there are nuances on the side of the branding element, I think you can go forward. But if you're really rethinking an approach, I think it's best to have your ducks in a row before going forward.
I can't agree more, Greg. And I would actually make two additional suggestions to that. One is make your case for support part of your branding process. Don't separate those two. Sometimes we talk about branding from a marketing perspective in terms of how we're going to market our programs, market our organization, while fundraising is another marketing function, if you will. So go add the case for support to your branding process, especially for a society where most of what it is that you are actually, looking for in terms of participation from the public is actually as donors. So, definitely make the case part of that. Secondly, in your campaign, you're strategizing around your capital campaign. One of the things that's really important in capital campaigns is to have a thoroughgoing strategy over a number of years, and to have your applications to foundations work in a way that helps you phase through and integrate and align with different foundations for different aspects of what it is that you're actually doing. So again, as Greg said, you've got to have your ducks in a row, have it well thought out before you go forward with that. Much better to do that than to go off with half a strategy and then have to regroup. It really speaks to this idea of being a high-performing organization. Next question. We are in Canada, and we want to know if there is significant difference. Okay, so I think I answered this question already, saying that I think you can use a lot of what we've been discussing here directly for Canadian organizations. Next question. Do you have any different information on operating grants versus program grants? I would say no. Operating grants, people have a bit of a fear around them, and I think that's because the ask is more diffuse, if you will. You're not asking for help on a specific program that you're working with or implementing. So my suggestion to you is to look at the foundation overall. What are its various giving interests? And in your operating ask, you're going to talk about the organization as a whole, and where you might choose to highlight within the whole spectrum of what the organization is doing and what you're asking for support for this overall, organizational needs, to highlight perhaps within that the other programs that match well with all the areas within which the foundation is actually interested in having an impact. Did you have anything to add to that, Greg?
No, I thought that was well put.
Okay. Last three questions. Do you have any specific tips for universities when they seek foundation funding?
I apologize, Jennifer. I don't have any specific tips for universities. Other than knowing from our research that so much of the university funding, that universities get such a large amount of funding from individual donors, that money is very loyal. It's some of the most loyal money because it's largely given by alumni. That that and religious giving is the most loyal giving we found in our research. So I guess, the only thing I have based on that is making sure you can make the case about why you need foundation grant as well as the funding you need from your alumni community, but that's nothing you wouldn't know anyway. So I apologize, I don't have anything real specific to universities. Shadi?
Yeah, I would say, universities, you have a wonderful advantage. It's called your alumni, and you can really leverage that relationship. They're very loyal to you. They often give. They want to see the university succeed, for sentimental reasons, but also because they want to keep the strength of the name of your university, of your institution, strong, because it impacts their reputation and their resume and so forth. So they're often very happy to help the university expand and grow, enhance its programs, and so on. So look to your alumni and see if they can open doors for you at various foundations and take advantage of that opportunity that's somewhat unique to higher learning as well, to all educational institutions. And other than that, I think, university fundraising, foundation fundraising doesn't differ. They do get a higher percentage of a university's budget comes from foundations than many other types of not-for-profit organizations. So again, you have an advantage. Last question, are there any application samples that you might be able to make available? Foundationsearch.com or foundationsearch.ca if you're a member. We have a whole data bank of sample letters and so forth. And I think I'm just going to ask Fanny because she looks after this. I think there's a few available to the public as well. Is there? No? Okay, no, only for our members. Other than that, I don't have any suggestions on where to go to look at samples. Greg, do you have any? I'm beating the dead horse. So it's not for an application, but for the narrative content. I think the Chart Impact shows everybody else's narrative description, so you can see from small to very large organizations how they've described it. Definitely not the same as an example of a letter of inquiry or an application, but might be helpful in designing the core narrative to see how others have done that. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg, for being with us here today. Just a wealth of such important information that you've shared with us, and very, very generously. So thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll be sending out the materials and the recording before end of day tomorrow, if not today. And if you have any questions, any technical difficulties, please feel free to email Fanny, our education coordinator, at fly@foundationsearch.com. And please do answer our feedback at the end of the webinar. Thank you.